generation. And, like him, I had discovered that the enemies against whom I once battled so furiously were more fantastic than real. I also discovered that I was not alone. Second thoughts turned out to be a natural process that others, less publicly visible than myself, had also pursued. Eccentric as my life seemed, at times even to me, it was not isolated, but more like a piece of the epoch itself. As a result of my experience, I have often thought of how different a life looks from the outside in. Of the name that identifies me but describes someone else. The external details that convey little of who I am, yet represent me. The problem is not unique to myself, but the serpentines of my life have made its progress unusually difficult for others to follow. Even allies who applaud the present acts of my public self often reserve suspicions of the private man, whose experience they do not share, and whose intentions they do not fully trust. As for the comrades I have left behind, who are still at odds with what I have become, it is as though I have ceased to exist. To them I can never be someone who felt what they felt, dreamed what they dreamed, suffered and learned through pain. Seeing me as one of them would pose questions too humbling to face. What second thoughts might they have had, too? What illusions would they have to give up now? Instead, they prefer the easier path of denial, and revile me as a symbol of one who left them. Worse still, of someone they fear to become. I am now as prominent on the conservative side of the ideological divide as I once was in the ranks of the left. But the conservatives I have joined are unlike the enemies I once imagined. The name itself does not begin to identify who they are, or who I am. The collapse of communism and the progressive future reveals how the moral language of politics has been hijacked by radicals. The fallen angels of the progressive left, Marxist and socialist, have been exposed as the reactionary ghosts of an oppressive past. It is the ideological adversaries of the left who float on the wave of a future that is free. Among my new comrades in arms, many began with second thoughts, having started out as 60s radicals like myself. Indeed, in the last few years, the nation as a whole has begun to draw back from the radical decade and its destructive agendas. What I had learned one way or another in the course of my journey, other Americans seem to have learned as well. Irving Kristol, who had second thoughts before me, has observed that every generation faces a barbarian threat in its own children, who need to be civilized. This is the perennial challenge, to teach our young the conditions of being human, of managing life's tasks in a world that is, and must remain, forever imperfect. The refusal to come to terms with this reality is the heart of the radical impulse, and accounts for its destructiveness, and thus for much of the bloody history of our age. My own life, which has often been painful and many times off course, is ultimately not discrete, a story to itself, but part of the narrative we all share. Part 1. Black Holes, 1904 to 1939. He had no home in a dat rock, don't you see? Negro Spiritual. Fivelle. What my father left me, really, was a few stories. They were mainly about himself, but in one instance the story was about his father, whom I hardly knew, and who died from cancer when I was 6. In fact, my only clear recollection of my grandfather Morris, a memory forever sharpened with remorse, is that when I was 6 he sat on my favorite record of the Seven Dwarfs, singing hi ho, it's off to work we go," and broke it. And that I yelled at him, protesting the injustice with all the force my small lungs could muster, as if my yelling could make the record whole. And that, shortly afterwards, they took my grandfather to the hospital, and I never saw him again. It was nearly 50 years ago that my grandfather vanished. I am sitting now in my own home, leafing through a photo album I inherited from my parents' house. The album is encased in red velvet and embroidered with white roses.